Part 1. The Smell of Rain and Trouble. The summer Nora Calloway turned 32, she had already learned everything she believed a woman needed to know about survival. How to read weather in the spine of a cloud, how to stretch a side of salted pork across 3 weeks of lean eating, how to look a creditor in the eye and smile without flinching. She had buried a husband and nearly buried a ranch, and she had done both on her own terms, without weeping in public or asking the town of Harlan Creek for a single charitable thing. So when she found the man in her grain store, bleeding through his shirt, gray-faced, leaning against a sack of winter wheat like it was the only wall left standing in his world, her first instinct was not pity. It was a quick, cold calculation. She had seen his face on the notice tattooed in the post outside Tanner's General 3 weeks prior. Wanted, Cole Devereaux, murder, robbery, reward $200. The illustration was rough, the kind a sheriff's deputy drew from memory after a witness description, but the jaw was right, the slope of the brows was right, and the eyes, even half closed with exhaustion and pain, even in the gray milk of pre-dawn light that crept beneath the granary door, were the color of deep river water, a dark gray-green that the drawing had somehow managed to capture despite its crudeness. She stood in the doorway with a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. He looked up at her without moving. Whatever fear he might have felt, he had it well controlled. "I didn't touch anything," he said. His voice was rough, scraped hollow. "You're bleeding on my grain sacks," she said. "I know. I'm sorry for it." That was the first thing that surprised her. She had expected either pleading or threatening. Criminals, in her experience, tended toward one or the other. This man's apology landed like something genuinely felt, and that unsettled her more than either alternative would have. She should have turned him out. She knew it even as she stood there, the lantern light pooling amber around her boots. Harlan Creek had a sheriff, a half-competent man named Aldous Price who was better at collecting vines than solving crimes, but who would nonetheless arrive with a deputy and a set of irons if she sent word. $200 was real money. $200 was the difference between making it through another winter or losing the east pasture to the bank. She did not send for Sheriff Price. What she did instead was a thing she spent the next several weeks trying to explain to herself. She set down the lantern, she went back to the house. She returned with a clean cloth, a bottle of rye whiskey, and a needle and thread. Part 2. Stitches. His wound was a bullet hole, and she had guessed as much. Situated just below his left shoulder, already 2 or 3 days old and beginning to show the first signs of the trouble that comes when a wound is neglected. She cleaned it with whiskey while he gripped the wooden post of the granary shelf and breathed through his nose in long, controlled pulls. He did not make a sound. This also surprised her. "Who shot you?" she asked, threading the needle. "A man named Harwick. He rides with the marshal out of Cutter's Bend." "Were you running from him when you came here?" "I was running from most of the state of Kansas," he said. There was no bravado in it. It sounded simply like a fact he had arrived at the way and you arrive at a number at the end of a long accounting. Tired of the work. Uncertain you'd done the math right. She put in 4 stitches, tied them off, and pressed a clean folded cloth against the site. "You need to keep that pressed tight for a day, at minimum. I'll be gone before dawn." "You won't," she said. "Not on that shoulder. Not on that horse." She had seen the animal through the granary's rear window, tethered to the fence post at the back of the property. It was a bay gelding with a loose shoe and a limp that showed even standing still. "You'd make 3 miles before one of you gave out, and I don't know which of you it would be first." He looked at her for a long moment. The lantern made shadows of the angles in his face. He was older than the wanted notice suggested. Or perhaps just harder. The notice said 30. She would have guessed 35, maybe more, with the weight of something that had been pressing on him for long enough to leave permanent marks. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. It was the right question. She didn't have a good answer for it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Don't make me regret starting." She left him with a blanket, a canteen of water, and half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She told him to stay out of sight, keep the granary door pulled to, and not to let her see him moving around the yard in daylight. And then she walked back to the house and stood in her kitchen in the dark for a long time, listening to the coyotes call to each other across the ridge and wondering what in the name of all reason she thought she was doing. Part 3. The Weight of a Name. He stayed 3 days, then 3 more. His name was Cole Devereaux. She knew that from the poster. He told her the rest in pieces. Over the course of those first days, not volunteering information so much as slowly releasing it when her questions made it clear she wasn't going to be satisfied with silence. He had worked the cattle drives out of Texas for 6 years. He had been, by his own account, a man of no particular distinction, not especially good, not especially bad, making wages and spending them and moving on the way drifting men do, when there's nothing anchoring them to any particular patch of earth. Then he had been in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong man's blood on his hands. The wrong man, she said one evening. She had taken to bringing him his supper rather than leaving it on the shelf. A concession she justified to herself on the grounds of efficiency, though she knew it wasn't that. And what does that mean exactly? His name was Patterson, Warren Patterson. He turned the name over slowly, like he was checking it for wear. He was a cattleman, rich man, had holdings from Abilene to the Colorado line. He was also a man who had been cheating his drovers for years. Short wages, company store gouging, the whole arrangement. There were men who'd worked for him 20 seasons and never came out ahead. And you killed him. He met her eyes. I didn't. His own foreman did. A man named Rudd, who'd finally had enough. I was in the bunkhouse when it happened. I saw Rudd go in. I heard the shot. I ran outside the same time half a dozen other men did. Rudd pointed at me. For it. So they chose you. I ran for it. So they chose you. I ran, he said, which I know doesn't look like innocence. Innocent men run all the time, she said, surprising herself with the certainty of it. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly, but something in that general direction. Closer, maybe, to the particular relief of being believed by someone you have not yet asked to believe you. She thought about Warren Patterson's brother in his senator's chair, with his money and his grief and his righteous anger aimed at the wrong man, and she felt a cold, quiet fury on behalf of someone she barely knew. A fury she recognized from long experience, as a thing that once felt is very hard to unfeel. Part 4. What the town knew. On the 4th day, she rode into Harlan Creek for supplies. It was a routine trip. She made it every week or 10 days, loading sacks of flour and coffee and salt into the wagon bed, with the same unhurried efficiency she applied to every other task. She exchanged the usual pleasantries with Martha Tanner, who ran the general store, and with old Emmett Sykes, who sat on the bench outside the barber shop and commented on the weather to everyone who passed. The wanted notice was still on the post. She passed it without pausing. In the saloon, she stopped there sometimes for a glass of beer, which the town regarded as a mild eccentricity in a widow, but tolerated. She heard 2 men at the bar talking about Cole Devereaux. One of them was a rider she didn't recognize, which meant he was passing through. He had wide shoulders and a badge she could see the edge of beneath his open coat. They tracked him west from the Cimarron, the man was saying to the bartender. He's got a wound on him, can't be moving fast. Marshall thinks he's gone to ground somewhere in this stretch of country, maybe 30, 40 miles around. She drank her beer slowly, looking out the window at the street. The afternoon light was yellow and dusty. A dog slept in the shade of the water trough. What did he do again? The bartender asked. He was a young man named Cleet, who asked questions mostly out of sociability rather than genuine curiosity. Killed a man in his own house. Man named Patterson, big ranching operation down in Kansas. Senator's brother. The writer shook his head with what appeared to be genuine feeling. Senator's been pushing hard to see justice done. She set a coin on the bar and left before either of them looked at her. On the ride home, she thought about the word justice and how it moved through the world, how it attached itself to money and power, the way burrs attach to a horse's fetlock, clinging tight, going wherever those things went, hitching a ride with the assumption that its destination was always righteous. She thought about Cole Devereaux's face when he told her about Rudd pointing his finger. She thought about the men who had nodded along out of fear. She thought about the $200. She thought about the East pasture, then she stopped thinking about the $200. Part 5. The language of work. The shoulder healed slowly. She had been afraid of infection. It had looked close, those first days, but the wound turned clean, and by the end of the first week he was moving around the granary without the careful stillness of a man guarding pain. She had told him to stay out of sight, but the ranch had its demands, and there was only so much she could accomplish alone. On the 9th morning she found him in the yard at first light, mending the fence along the east pasture without being asked, using wires she'd left coiled by the post for 2 weeks, because she hadn't gotten to it yet. She stood at the fence and watched him work for a moment. He moved with the quiet economy of someone who had done this kind of work a long time and didn't need to think about it. "You'll tear that stitching," she said. "I've been careful," he said without stopping. She could see that he had been. He was favoring the left side, Yever scarce, keeping the shoulder easy, using his right arm for the heavy pulls. She picked up the other end of the wire and they worked together without speaking for an hour until the fence was done. The morning was cool and smelled of sage and coming rain. Hawks circled above the ridge to the north. The gelding, she had pulled the loose shoe and reshot him with one from her barn stock, grazed in the east pasture with her 2 horses looking content, looking like he belonged there. This was the thing that frightened her most, she realized. Not discovery, not the sheriff, not the marshal's rider in the saloon, not the senator with his grief and his power and his pointed justice. What frightened her was how naturally this man had begun to fit into the rhythms of her days, how the ranch felt differently occupied with him in it, how she had started, without deciding to leave the coffee hot in the morning. She was not a woman who confused herself easily. She had not confused herself about Thomas Calloway, whom she had married at 19 with clear eyes and no illusions. A good man, a steady man, but not a complicated one. She had not confused herself about the nature of a loneliness which she had lived with long enough to understand as a condition rather than a crisis. But this was something she didn't have a clean category for, and that absence of category unsettled her in a way she found difficult to sit with. That evening over supper in the kitchen, he had moved inside by the 5th night, which she had allowed without making a formal decision about it. She looked at him across the table and said, "They're looking for you. There was a marshal's man in town." He put down his fork. His face went careful and still. "How close?" He said 30 or 40 miles, but that was yesterday. If they're tracking you west, they could narrow it. He nodded slowly, looking at the table. "I should go." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe you should let me think about it." He looked up at her. "Nora." It was the first time he had used her name. She had told it to him on the 2nd day, when the formality of ma'am had started to feel absurd. The way he said it now, with a quiet weight to it like something set down carefully, made her hold very still. "You've already done more than you should have. More than most people would. I don't want you to take on what's coming from helping me." "What's coming?" she said. "Isn't something you get to decide for me." He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze without difficulty. This too she had learned. How to hold a man's gaze until he understood that you had more patience than he did, more quiet, more time. "All right," he said at last, and picked up his fork again. Part 6. What she knew and what she felt. She had thought, when she first found him, that the situation was simple. A fugitive and a woman with a bounty on his head. Clear arithmetic. What made it stop being simple was what she came to understand about the space between what I know and what I feel, and how those two things are not always the same country, and how sometimes the road between them is longer than you anticipated. What she knew, Cole Devereaux was wanted for murder. There was a notice on a post outside Tanner's General. There was a reward. There was a marshal's deputy drinking at the bar. What she felt, that the story on the notice was a narrow thing, the kind of story that gets written by people with enough money and enough grief to write the version they want. What she felt was that the world had done Cole Devereaux a particular cruelty. Not the cruelty of random disaster, but the deliberate organized cruelty of a system that knew exactly who it was crushing, and proceeded anyway. What she felt, sitting across the kitchen table from him at night, was that she trusted him. Not blindly, not the young woman's trust that mistakes confidence for character, but the earned trust of someone who had watched a man work, and listened to him speak, and observed the way he treated the animals and the tools and the small things that nobody was watching, and found, in all of those observations, something consistent. Consistency, in her experience, was worth more than charm. She also felt, and this was the thing she turned away from most consistently, though it kept returning, something she had not felt since Thomas was alive, and that she had not expected to feel again, and that she was not entirely sure she welcomed. It was a warmth. It was the specific quality of wanting someone else to be in the room. It was noticing too much the particular way his voice sounded when he was tired versus when he was rested. It was small and inconvenient, and she didn't know what to do with it. She was a practical woman. She filed it away under problems to be dealt with later and focused on what was immediate. What was immediate? There were men coming. They might not know exactly where to look yet, but they were moving in the right direction. She had perhaps a week, perhaps less. Part 7. a decision that isn't one choice. She rode out to the McCready place on the 11th day. The McCreadys were her nearest neighbors, a hard-working Irish family, 2 brothers and a sister-in-law, who kept to themselves and had a reputation for not asking questions that weren't their business. She asked Jim McCready if he had any information he'd heard from passing riders or the post road, anything about marshals moving through the territory. He told her there were 3 men out of Cutter's Bend working a 40-mile grid, checking every homestead, moving slow but thorough. 2 days out, he thought, from her section. She thanked him, declined coffee, and rode home. That evening she told Cole. He stood at the window of the kitchen looking out at the dark yard, and she could see his shoulders move as he breathed. "I'll go tonight," he said. "There's a way through this Crooked Creek Canyon that comes out 40 miles north past the territory line. If you follow it right, you can be in Colorado in 3 days, and they can't touch you there. Not on a Kansas warrant." He turned from the window. "You know this land well." "I've lived here 11 years. "Did Thomas Calloway know you were this capable when he married you?" The question surprised her. It was not mocking. It was genuine, the kind of question that contains within it a form of respect. "I think he figured it out somewhere along the way," she said. A silence settled between them. The lamp on the table made a warm circle. Outside, the wind was moving through the grass the way it did before a change in weather, long and low and restless. "I want to tell you something," he said. He was still standing at the window, but he was looking at her now. "What you did, taking me in, the stitches, the food, the weeks of risk, I won't forget it. Whatever happens next, wherever I end up, I'll carry that." She felt something move through her that she chose not to analyze too closely. "Don't carry it like a debt," she said. "I made my own choices." "That's exactly what I mean," he said. "You made your own choices. That matters more than you know." She packed him provisions before midnight. A week's worth of dried meat and biscuits wrapped in oilcloth, a good canteen, a map she drew herself by lamplight, the Crooked Creek route marked in pencil. She gave him a clean shirt from a box in the back of the closet, Thomas's, which she had kept with no plan for it. And she didn't think about that very hard. She walked him out to the gelding in the dark. He looked at her for a moment in that way. He looked at her for a moment in that way he had, as though he were committing something to memory. "If things were different," he said, and then stopped. "I know," she said, because she did know. She knew exactly what the unfinished sentence contained, and she knew also why it had to stay unfinished, at least for now. The world they were living in was not a world that allowed for easy completions. He swung up into the saddle. The gelding moved beneath him, and she noted with quiet satisfaction that the horse was sound. The new shoe had taken, the limp was gone. "The canyon entrance is due north," she said. "Follow the dry creek bed when you hit the fork." "Not the wash, the bed. The wash goes shallow and loses itself in the rocks. The bed goes through." He nodded. He looked like he was going to say something else. Then he turned the horse north and rode into the dark, and she stood in the yard and watched him until the sound of hooves was gone, and there was nothing left but the wind and the stars, and the long silence of the open country. Part 8. After the marshals came 2 days later, 3 of them on good horses, with a warrant and the careful, practiced manner of men who had done this many times. She made them coffee on the porch and answered their questions with the calm of a woman who had nothing to hide. Had she seen any strangers in the area? She'd seen a rider pass the east road a week ago, she said. Couldn't make out details at that distance. They asked if they could search the outbuildings. She said, of course, please help yourselves. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. She had cleaned the granary, removed any trace, washed the extra blanket. There was no sign that anyone had been there. They thanked her and rode on. She watched them go the same way she had watched him go, standing still, not moving until they were out of sight. Then she turned back to the ranch and went to work because the fences still needed tending and the east pasture wouldn't manage itself, and there was always more to be done. She did not know if she would hear from Cole Devereaux again. The West was a large country, enormous, full of distances that swallowed people whole, that made finding one person a matter of luck or fate or a combination of both. She did not know if the territory line would hold, if the Colorado warrant situation was what she thought it was, if Rudd's lies would eventually come undone the way lies tended to when they were structural, when they were holding up a weight they weren't built for. She did not know what she felt exactly. except that she felt it clearly and that the clarity was, in its own way, a form of knowledge. She had made her choices. She did not regret them. What she knew and what she felt had ended up, after all, being the same country. The road between them had been longer and stranger than she had expected. She had traveled it anyway, in the middle of the night, by lantern light, with a needle and thread and a bottle of whiskey and the particular courage of someone who has been practical long enough to know when practicality is not enough. The summer wore on. The east pasture held. She paid down a quarter of the bank debt with the money she made from the late wheat harvest, and she let herself feel the satisfaction of that without qualification. In the fall, a letter came. No return address. The postmark was from a town in Colorado she'd never heard of. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. 3 sentences written in a careful, deliberate hand. The road went through, as you said. The debt is paid off, and I'm working honest wages. I hope the east pasture is doing them well. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the box at the back of the closet, next to the shirt she hadn't given away. Outside, the first cool wind of autumn was moving through the grass, long and low and full of the smell of change. Not the end of something, she thought, but the turn of it. The season moving, as season is due, toward whatever came next. She went back to work. End.